have to do with making the information available online. And we think that plays into the transparency part and help build trust with residents in the community. Also, recommendation 3 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department improve data collection by including at least an annual community survey that collects data from a variety of community sources. And the results of that survey should be posted on a public-facing website. So we, as a commission, did a survey prior to completing the report and coming up with our recommendations. And we felt as if it gave us some insight into what the community wanted. But we think this can be done on an annual basis to figure out what the Mount Vernon residents' perceptions of the police department are, how they can be better, and how they can better serve the community. Recommendation 4 was to establish increased transparency through the use of a public-facing website and social media platforms that includes all Mount Vernon Police Department policies, policy changes, any reform, an online complaint portal that vividly displays the relevant policy and statistics on pertinent policing data that include but is not limited to stops, summonses, arrests, reported crime, civilian complaints, etc. This data should be broken down by race, age range, sex, and ethnicity. And then recommendation 5 is that the language of the above mentioned website and social media platforms be available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. But we also wanted to translate to other languages the demographics of Mount Vernon change. So if we have an influx of a different language speaking group, then we want to make sure that we are flexible and able to adapt to that as well. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions, comments, suggestions, any feedback we're open to having right now. All right. Assuming there's no comments or suggestions, I'm going to move on to the next slide with recommendation 6 and 10. Recommendation 6 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department publish data on the department's website showing the demographics of the department and comparing those demographics to the demographics of the city of Mount Vernon as a whole. Recommendation 7 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department make improvements to the current civilian complaint process. And some of the improvements that we suggested are to make it an online platform where folks can go in and make the complaint online if necessary, personnel complaints online, so that we remove the intimidation of going into the police department and reporting a police officer to another police officer. Recommendation 8 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department educated information off to consider. Recommendation 9 is that the city of Mount Vernon establish a civilian complaint review board to review and substantiate civilian complaint. The CCRB shall have the authority to initiate investigations and also the authority to subpoena the records necessary to complete said investigations. And recommendation 10 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department submit to Mount Vernon City Council on an annual basis a report showing progress and implementation of the recommendations outlined by this commission. The date of the release of the report shall be announced at least 1 week in advance to the public to give the community an opportunity to have a formal voice in the department's progress. So this recommendation speaks to the fact that we don't want these recommendations to just be a document on one's bookshelf or desk. We want to make sure that progress is actually being made and that we're checking in as a community on the progress of all of these recommendations. So I'll stop there to see if there's any feedbacks, comments, suggestions, or anything of that nature. All right, we got a quiet group today. All right, so I'll go on to slide 3, which begins our policies, procedures, and training recommendations. Recommendation 11 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department continue to monitor the use of force policy as developed by the department, and that the policy is enhanced of the continuum of force scale, begin with the officer presence, used as the first level of interaction, where an officer's attitude is professional and non-threatening. It is also recommended that the policy enhancement for the second level of interaction include mindfulness of the officer's tone, and that the police officer should be trained to and receive pre and post testing when there are any updates to this use of force policy. So it's our goal to make sure that all members of service know what the use of force policy is, how they go into all interactions, and the goal is to train our officers not to go in threatening and not to create an intimidating environment, but to go in, just to offer support. Recommendation 12 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department develop a comprehensive written matrix of discipline that had varying degrees and consistent levels of development and accountability, with input from the various unions for all members of service. Recommendation 13 is that all 911 dispatchers are trained annually in handling behavioral health crises. Recommendation 14 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department train every member of service on how to prevent arrests by redirecting vulnerable populations and individuals experiencing a behavioral health crisis to the most appropriate and least restrictive community resource. So I'll stop there and just want to see if there are any comments, questions, suggestions, feedback from anyone. All right, so I'll continue on to our next 4 recommendations. So recommendation 15 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department consult with an organization, for example, Cahoots, and the Westchester County to develop a formal policy and co-response team composed of police officers and mental health professionals to handle behavioral health calls. So the goal behind this recommendation is to have the appropriate skills present whenever there's a behavioral health crisis, and our goal is to prevent instances where something is escalated that shouldn't be, or that it doesn't need to be escalated. So if we have the mental health professional there, someone who is used to dealing with behavioral health crises, we feel as if there will be effective and responses. Recommendation 16 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department initiate bystander intervention training that includes simulations and role playing. So bystander intervention training is sometimes, referred to training around the duty to intervene. So recommending that kind of training. And recommendation 17 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department provide and or continue to provide ongoing professional development and training for all members of service, with annual renewals of specified trainings as deemed appropriate. So we want to make sure that our training is continued throughout the officers. And recommendation 18 recommends that the current training curriculum be supplemented with additional or more specific training in the areas of de-escalation, continuum of use of force, bystander intervention, disabled community interactions, anti-racism, racial and implicit bias, recognizing mental health illness and substance abuse, LGBTQ community interactions, intersectionality, undocumented resident interactions, crisis intervention, trauma and stress management for all members of service, tactical perception and procedural justice principles, and want these to be all part of the onboarding process for all the new personnel in the Mount Police Department. I will note that today we had a recommendation that we also add behavioral modification and conflict resolution to this training list, and I think the the commissioner is open to that. So that may also be added to the report. And we want these trainings to be required and recommended for completion within the 1.5-year period, probationary period. So I'll stop here to see if there are any questions, concerns, feedback, suggestions.
Hey Danielle, on the Facebook page, we do have a question.
Okay, awesome. I'm glad
it says, do we know if we have the technology capacity to manage an online database, and would it require an adjustment to a current position to monitor this database, or would the CCRB be tasked with oversight?
So there's a lot to that question. The CCRB will be tasked to, currently, as we have it recommended, to substantiate civilian complaints. So they wouldn't be tasked with general oversight of the police department. But I know currently that the city is working on improving their website, so servers that they use. And one of our recommendations is that we actually have an information officer, right? So currently, I'm not sure there's someone on staff who can consistently do this, but one of our recommendations is that we have a specific information officer who can go in and update all of these platforms on the website, and not only on the website, but also via social media. Do you have anything to add to that, Coach D?
No, I'm just trying to see if I can pick up some of the questions that are happening on Facebook.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad you were able to do that. Okay, so I'll go on to the next slide. If there are no questions from within the Zoom or on Facebook, do we have any more questions on Facebook?
Yeah, let's see. Donna Jackson, should the CCRB and the police department monitor the use of force policy in tandem as opposed to the police department alone?
So, that's something we spoke about. So our recommendation with the creation of a CCRB was to ensure that we did have the investigative power and the subpoena power, but we aren't the ones responsible for legislating it. So the city council does have the ability to specify exactly what the CCRB does, and they can go into a little bit more detail and make it a little bit more prescriptive. So it's not to say that they won't have that ability. We just don't know yet because it hasn't been legislated completely. Any other questions on Facebook, Coach D?
Nope.
All right. Okay, so recommendation 19 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department seek funding and designate and or reallocate some of the existing budget to all of the recommended trainings throughout this report. Recommendation 20 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department develop a formal policy for use of body cameras, storage, or recorded footage, and disciplinary measures to be taken if body and car cameras are not utilized appropriately. Recommendation 21 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department develop a formal policy and procedure for managing large protests and events. Recommendation 22 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department develop a formal policy and procedure that covers interactions with undocumented residents in the Mount Vernon community. And recommendation 23 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department develop a plan to increase procedural justice. I'll pause there to see if there are any comments, suggestions, questions from the Zoom or on Facebook.
Nothing on Facebook.
Awesome. Okay, I'll keep going through.
You want me to take it up here or?
Yes, please, Coach D.
Okay. Let me just get this set. Close that out. Okay, here we go. So this one is on the qualifications, recruitment, retention recommendations. Number 24 is the commission recommends that the city of Mount Vernon make a good faith effort to offer its police officers a salary and benefits that are commensurate with surrounding municipalities to assist with retention of quality personnel in Mount Vernon. That comes down to the fact of badge drain. And while it's not the only issue, it is a major reason as to why we're not able to retain our police officers. There is a chart that shows how low our initial, our first recruits are paid relative to everybody else in the municipality. They're about on an average from $13,000 to $15,000 less. And also, in addition to that, when they go to the academy, when the new recruits go to the academy, most of all the other municipalities pay for their equipment, with the exception maybe of firearms and badges and stuff like that. But everything else, everything that they get, they pay for. But our recruits have to pay for it out of pocket. So that means that if you're a recruit and you were working and you're going to probably have to get off of that job in order to do the academy work, you're now coming out of pocket to do so. And so that plays a role into some of the things that they have to overcome from a financial standpoint in order to stay and be retained.
Was they do share that chart?
Yes, if you can, shorten. Yeah, sure. So when you look at this chart, I mean, the first thing that pops out to you is Rye's first year at $77,000, and Rye is not in the same category as we are. As DC Jennifer Lackard said yesterday, they have half the force that we have, and of course, you know the tax base has a lot to do with that as well. But if you see even to the ones that are more commensurate, like Westchester County and White Plains and New Rochelle, with the exception of Yonkers, you'll see that we're just not even at the lower part. We're not even close to what other officers are getting. This matters especially all the way through into their pensions. I know in the federal sector we had top three. I wonder it's probably the same for the state, but this affects your top three in terms of your retirement. So as you see at the end, the top pay, you had $92,000. You know, overtime doesn't go into that. It's your base pay. So their base pay is an average of $13,000, almost $14,000 less than the other municipalities' officers at that same time. So that plays a role into when a police officer decides, okay, if they're given an offer in Westchester County. I know they lost a lot of officers. I think it was in December, about 7 or 8 to Westchester County, good officers. And so when you look at that and you look at this scale, you can understand why. So this is one of the reasons why, as a commission, we really made this a top priority in terms of what we're recommending. And it's not just for the police department, it's for the city council as well. It's for the controller, it's for the mayor. This can't be done just by the police department itself. Everybody at the highest level of our city executive chain has to. I know in the federal sector we had top three.
Sorry.
All right. So that's basically the chart, and that's the impetus of that. Anything that has to do in terms of retaining officers and trying to alleviate badge training. All right. So we'll move on to we're going to move on to 25. The commission recommends that the Mount Vernon. I'll wait for you.
Sorry, you're a little quick.
Okay. The Mount Vernon Police Reform Commission recommends that the Mount Vernon Police Department increase awareness in the community about upcoming police exams. And number 26 is the Mount Vernon. The commission recommends that the Mount Vernon Police Department recruit and hire more Mount Vernon residents to become police officers. Those are pretty much along the same line of wanting the department to look like its community. The community is 68% African American, and while Mount Vernon Police Department is the most diverse police department in Westchester County, it doesn't reflect its population. And so that's what those two recommendations go to. On 27, the commission recommends that the police officer benefits be enhanced by absorbing some of the costs of onboarding supplies and equipment for officers competitive to surrounding municipalities. That goes back to what I was talking about when we go to the academy and other things. And B, partnering with local colleges to develop a tuition reimbursement program. as we can stop there and really quickly on that last point, there's going to be other things in our recommendation that goes to education. Even at the initial point, in terms of getting kids at Mount Vernon High School to be able to take a course so that could hopefully encourage them to decide to join the police force. But in terms of this with the tuition, this also goes in terms of as far as promotion internally, making sure you have well-educated officers that are available for higher positions, and that's only a benefit to the city, as well as the police department. In terms of this trust issue, which is the basis of this Executive Order 203 from the governor, everything that we're talking about today is based on trying to increase trust, and so that goes a lot towards that. So if there's any questions or comments at this time, please do so. Okay, so we're going to move on. Number 28. The Commission recommends that a good faith effort be put towards renegotiating the collective bargaining agreement to include consideration of a 10-hour tour or alternative tour schedules instead of a current 8-hour tour to increase police officer morale. B, increasing the annual uniform and equipment stipend. C, doing a cross-municipality benefit analysis to ensure parity with surrounding departments. D, additional training days. E, elimination of inequities and abuses in past practice. As far as A is concerned, when I went to the Citizens Police Academy, one of the things they were talking about was the tours, and where they and how they were going to try to strategize by putting police officers and try to keep them in sectors so that the citizens in that sector can get to know the police officers better. That may not have anything specifically to do with the change from 8 to 10, but it matters in the sense, again, of trying to build that trust. And if you could do it at a longer tour, that's only giving more time for police officers and citizens to get together and have a relationship. We talked about the annual uniform across municipality benefit analysis to show parity. We talked about that. Additional training days is a huge issue. They basically get about 5 training days a year. And for everything and all the challenges that police officers face nowadays, that's woefully inadequate. And so that's where in the collective bargaining process that could be addressed. And I know when we had Nick Massagiorgio, the president of the PBA, on, he was open to a lot of things along that line. So that's a good thing in the sense that if they're open, if the parties are open towards making this collective bargaining agreement, putting something with training days or additional training days. Like, for instance, I know when I spoke to Sergeant David Clark, he's and another police officer is currently going through a training with the Jiu-Jitsu family, Gracie family. He has a police reform initiative in terms of trying to teach police officers how to subdue assailants without using a carotid choke or anything along that line. That should be something that the police provides, but they are paying for it out of their own pocket. That's like $500 per person. So again, that's something that should and hopefully will be negotiated, or something facsimile of that negotiated in the CBA. And on number 29, let's see, the Commission recommends that the Mount Vernon Police Department continue to enhance the Mount Vernon Police Department officer wellness model by including psychological assessments focused on emotional intelligence, as well as medical and psychological fitness assessments conducted periodically throughout a member's career. I do not know if the Deputy Commissioner is on and can speak to the WELL program. I don't think she is.
Yes, I am here.
Oh, there you go. You want to speak to the police department's WELL program that you initiated?
Sure. I'm sorry if I'm not in person or you can see me visibly right now, but are we talking about the MVPD WELL or the MV WELL, which is the community wellness component?
MVPD WELL.
Sure. So that is an officer wellness program that we devised back in August shortly after I got started, which really addresses the issues that law enforcement have around the types of information and incidents that they see in their general line of duty. And it's a new model that I think most police departments are moving to realize that officers see a lot of information and things during the course of their job that are challenging to them, and we just want to be able to better support them. So MVPD Well requires, one of the initiatives that we put out was post-crisis wellness checks. So when there is an incident of serious violence or there is a death, then we actually require the officer to do a debriefing with a clinician at the end of their tour to just process what they've seen and heard and if there's any need for additional resources. We have at the moment 16 clinicians that are dedicated to our MVPD Well team. It is an outside entity run by licensed clinicians and supervised by a master clinician who have experience working with law enforcement. And we partnered up with them sort of post COVID and tapping into some COVID relief dollars that were available for first responders. And then I sort of took that model and expanded it and partnered up with different individuals who were receiving those state dollars to figure out how we can expand that. And so right now, the MVPD Well model allows officers to call at any time. They can schedule an appointment by text and actually have that appointment by video or text or phone to whatever their comfort level is. When it's a post-crisis or an incident, we will require them to check in. And then that officer has the opportunity to continue the conversation thereafter. And that this is of no charge to them. This is a free opportunity that we offer all of our members of service. And it's civilian as well as our sworn officers. So the beauty of this is that as we're moving forward with reform and really understanding that wellness is a total mind and body, it's not just your physical health, it's your occupational health, how you feel about your job, which also ties into retention that officers have. Why are they staying? Why are they going? What is it that they need to feel more safe or happier with them out in the police department? And so that's part of the, we look at the 8 dimensions of health and wellness around financial literacy, spiritual wellness, physical, environment, what's going on with their family, because all of that impacts how they show up every day to work, which in turn impacts how they show up every day for the community. So it's sort of like a whole system that we're developing, but it's based on the MVPD Well model, but we're looking at making sure they're getting the services that they need. And by them being able to understand the language and understand the situation themselves, because they're dealing with a clinician or they're kind of talking through stressors that they have, when they encounter people in the community that themselves are also dealing with things, it's not so foreign to them. So we want to sort of make it so that everyone understands that this is around an entire community moving towards wellness. And what does that look like? And how do we do that together? How does that work? Did that work for you, Dwayne?
Definitely. Thank you so much. Are there any questions or comments about what the Deputy Commissioner has said or anything else that we've read in this slide?
No, so on Facebook, Donna Jackson said, yes, these traumas should be monitored, and great to hear about these wellness initiatives.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, it's very important. Again, I urge anybody who has not gone to the Citizens Police Academy. I think they have one coming up, right, DC?
Yes, the Citizens Police Academy is starting Tuesday, April 6th at 6:30.
So you said Tuesday, April 6th.
Training unit at pd.cmvny.com.
Sorry, D. Slacky, you broke up. Would you mind repeating April 6th at 6:30 and everything after that?
Yes, at 6:30. It is a 10-week session where members of the community come to the police department for 2 hours, 6:30 to 8:30, over a 10-week session. I heard you talking about your experience, Dwayne, and I think you happen to be that spot on with what we hope members of the community have in terms of their experience. But if individuals are interested in joining in this next session, they will need to email trainingunit@pd.cmvny.com for more information, so we can get members of the community signed.
It just gives you a wider view and a more focused view of exactly what the police officers have to go through in the Mount Vernon Police Department. And to their credit, they're very honest. I mean, there isn't a lot of fluff that they throw at you. They're very honest with the questions that you ask. So I urge you to, if you can, to join that. But if there's no more questions or suggestions on this slide, let's move on.
So I just want to, before we move on, I want to acknowledge, Donna, I see that you asked for the information in the chat, so I'm trying to gather it, and then I'll add it to the Facebook chat for everyone there. Just give us a few minutes on that. All right, so I'll go to the next slide, Coach.
Okay. So, number 30, the Commission recommends that the Mount Vernon Police Department initiate positive community reports that allow police officers to identify positive interactions in the community and share it internally. I'm the program director of the Mount Vernon Junior Knights basketball team. We're the feeder system for the high school, and we come out of the First United Methodist Church. I can't tell you how many Mount Vernon police officers actually come over to the YCOP to come in and do whatever it is that they do. We're coaching, so we don't get to see it, but we know that they interact. And it's stuff like that the community does not know. So I think that this particular recommendation goes to that we need to spotlight. As a matter of fact, in the meeting that I had with the commissioner, that was one of the things that I just highlighted, not only for his officers, but for himself, but the things that they all are doing. And need to let the citizens know that the citizens can't know what you're doing if you don't tell them. So I think that's where that recommendation goes to. And number 31, the commission recommends that the Mount Vernon Police Department increase diversity by A, having written diversity goals, B, dedicating a position to the recruitment and retention of members of service, C, dedicating a position to diversity, equity, and inclusion of members of service, D, establishing a formal written policy on improving diversity in the police department, E, recruiting from local career fairs and schools that represent the demographic makeup of the city of Mount Vernon, F, sending diverse members of service to engage and speak at community events and participate in career days, G, developing a curriculum in conjunction with both local colleges and high schools. That's what I was talking about with respect to our high school students who would be interested in becoming police officers. Create a course on public safety that develops a pipeline to the careers in the Mount Vernon Police Department. H, reinstating the Explorer program, Police Athletic League, or similar programming to expose local youth to law enforcement and public safety careers. And I, collecting and reporting on the data from the above mentioned efforts. I'll just take H, because obviously as a coach, a youth coach in Mount Vernon, the reason I'm even got involved in this was because here we are coaching these young Black youths, and it's important and it's imperative that they start to have a better relationship with the police department. Ultimately, anything that we do here is going to be carried and made better or worse with them. And so it only makes good sense for me, as far as I'm concerned, to be able to at least be a spearhead and at the same time try to encourage these young folks that comes through our programs and really through all the youth sports or programs that exist, to let them, to try to foster and begin to foster a better trusting relationship with the police department. But I don't know, Danielle, if you have anything else you want to add on that?
No, I think recommendation 31 is just reflective of a lot of people have said they want, a police force that looks like them. So I think through these efforts, we're trying to create visibility for police officers, change the relationship with the youth and police officer, and also have people visualize law enforcement as a possible career path, right? There's been a lot of stigma around it. So we kind of want to change their perception and see that we can be the change in these positions.
Donna Jackson just put on Facebook, she said, I would suggest you add the Mount Vernon City School District as a written partner. Anything regarding curriculum programming requires their sign off. There's a connection to be made there. on a lot of levels. Yesterday at the meeting, one of the things, those levels we spoke about was dealing with kids with special disabilities that's already going, that would go hand in hand with what things that DC Lackard and the police department is doing with respect to mental health. And so there's connections that's available there that I think that should be explored. And I'm pretty sure they will be. But that's a great point in terms of making them a written partner in a lot of the things that we're trying to do or what we're recommending.
Agreed. Great recommendation. Want to open it to any other comments, suggestions? That was a great one. Any other thoughts around it?
If not, let's keep it moving. Number 33, the commission recommends that the city of Mount Vernon sponsor an exam preparatory course for adult residents in Mount Vernon, 21 plus years. The PREPS course may also include how to prepare for the police department interview process or mock interviews. That's pretty self-explanatory. Again, it goes back to having a police department that's reflective and looks like it's citizenry. And
yeah, I also think it's we've been there's a lot of people who just don't test well, right? But that doesn't mean that they aren't qualified officers. So we want to make sure that we're overcoming the hurdles of testing as far as getting a diverse police force. So we want to make sure that's not an impediment. Just having the resources. So I think that's what that recommendation is based around.
And number 34, the commission recommends that the city of Mount Vernon offer the civil service examination at no cost to high school graduates who pass the proposed elective public safety curriculum taught in their senior year. Number 35, the commission recommends the Mount Vernon Police Department continue conducting post-offer psychological assessments and ensure that the psychological provider is trained to work in culturally sensitive environments that are unique to Black and minority members of service. And number 36, the commission recommends that the Mount Vernon Police Department continue to enhance the new continuous quality assurance system put in place to set standards for internal and external quality review, including 360 performance reviews, supervision, conflict resolution, and quality improvement measures across all levels of the department. I am going to speak a little bit more to number 35. Again, at the Citizens Police Academy, the training unit actually does a lot of the assessments in terms of recruits from Mount Vernon. And Sergeant David Clark said that one of the issues that used to be an issue, and probably I would imagine in some cases still is that here you had a psychologist who was doing the workup, the assessment of some of these new recruits. And they found that if you had the psychologist that was not culturally sensitive and unique to Black and minority people, and if they took it in a not in a prejudice, but in if they felt intimidated or anything along that line, that would actually be a detriment to the person who's being assessed. And so it is important to have the providers to have these type of sensitivities to the type of communities, so that could also enhance the ability to have our police department look more like us. Got anything, Danielle?
No, I think you did a great job. Any questions, comments, suggestions from the attendees or the audience?
Okay, so we're gonna move right along and knock out these last two before we get into community engagement. It's 37 and 38 we're looking for.
Already? 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here we go. You see that?
There we go. Yeah, we're good. Okay. So number 37, the commission recommends that the Mount Vernon Police Department conduct a biennial survey of the members of service to solicit input about employee satisfaction and recommend changes in the department with answers required from leadership. And number 38, the commission recommends that the Mount Vernon Police Department set eligibility policies for when a police officer would be qualified to be promoted to a new position. I'll speak a little bit to the 37 again. I know I'm sounding like a broken record about this Citizens Police Academy, but it was such an eye-opening experience. One of the things that the police officers were very honest about was while they enjoy the work that they're doing, they openly admitted that there's some issues within. And I think this commission recommendation goes to that. I was a union official as well, and you know, I know that one of the things that we did one time, which was a surprise to a lot of our members, was when we did a survey with respect to things along that line about input, we found out that a lot of the members that were doing good work were upset that when they did good work, they got more work as a result of other members not doing enough or getting in trouble for not doing what they're supposed to do. And that was a little bit of a shock for a union member to have to understand and hear that. But it was helpful in trying to come up with things to try to make it a lot more easier from a disciplinary standpoint and from the disciplinary process. I think that goes to this as well. This will be something that the leadership can constantly work on to make sure that there's a smooth sailing ship internally. And so I think that recommendation is a really good one. It could be a very telling one as well.
So Donna Jackson on Facebook said, shouldn't there be an ongoing feedback loop for how things are going internally, as opposed to just doing it twice a year? DC Lacker, could you speak to how feedback is received currently in the police department? If you're available, sorry.
Sure. So currently, the way the complaint applications are available on the website. So individuals can complete a complaint. They can come into the department, and they will either go into the complaint room and an officer will give them a form and fill it out for them, or they can take the form with them. Prior to maybe 6 months ago, and before I started, the process was an individual would have to show identification in order to get a complaint form, and that has been waived. So an individual can come in, and if they're not comfortable in filing a report, they will then just still be given a form to complete. That form will then be turned in directly to our Internal Affairs Division. They will then begin the process to collect information on the complaint. That involves talking to interested parties, getting MD5s and reports from interested people in case the report was not done prior to. They'll begin the investigation process. We currently track those complaints. For the 2020 year, I believe the complaint number was at 25. The number was higher than that, I believe at 34 for 2019. So we do see a decrease in that, but I do have to say, we're not sure, and there's really no evidence to say that the reasons why the numbers have gone down is because people have been required to fill out a form. So with that out of the equation, and now people being able to complete complaints wherever they may be, and whether they're at City Hall and they get a form, they come to the police department and get a form, or they just go online and download it and complete the form, we'll then begin to track that. And then notification and a response is given to the individual. We follow up, and we're hoping to really refine that process as to how complaints are resolved. I think that's been a challenge of ours coming into the administration, but currently trying to figure out at what point and how do we notify and what does that look like. So I'm happy that we're looking at a CCRB because I think that will help us further narrow down how complaints should be processed and then disseminated results back out to the community.
So DC, can you speak to how we get employee feedback internally?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm not sure how it was done prior to me. I don't think it was done much. I do remember I started with our Office of Wellness doing surveys, and I was told that that was the first time they had ever completed a survey in the department. So what I do is I do it during our training modules because, as it was mentioned earlier, there are several times during the year. At this point, it's 5 training days where all of our members of service are trained on a particular topic. So we make sure that we have every unit, every member that's out on the street get trained on this subject or whatever the module is for that training cycle. And so during that time is when I'm doing the surveys, putting them out, getting feedback on different concerns. So right now we have last training cycle in September, we did officer wellness. I measured officer or department attitudes around the 8 dimensions of health and wellness, right? And so we noticed that, and that data will be published very, very soon. I know that there was a question around when is that info going out to the community? And so we disseminated the information. We have the information, we quantified it, we have all the data, and we're in a process of completing a report that will be considered an organizational wellness assessment. It really states the state of the department, and that those figures and data will be in there. So everyone should look forward to that coming out in the next couple of weeks. But that will have the details of that survey, and then it will also speak to what we're doing moving forward. In this current training cycle, we're coming up on Financial Literacy Month, which is the month of April. And most officers struggle, especially with, if you've seen the chart, and we talked about how there's a huge pay inequity in the city of Mount Vernon between our officers and other officers in surrounding municipalities. Much of that has arrived at that place for various, maybe the contracts were not negotiated correctly, organizationally things were not managed right. And so we're at a point where our officers are paid at least $15,000 less at the beginning, at the onset of their career, than any other officer in surrounding municipalities. Over the course of a 5-year time frame, they would have lost out on $100,000 worth of income. And so because of that, officers are having a challenge with managing basic finances. And if they are the only breadwinner in the home, or if there are childcare challenges, we're trying to help mitigate that as well, because there's opportunity for them to work, but we also, in a city where we're trying to post-COVID manage finances a little better and figure out how we can reduce the amount of overtime, that's a challenge for officers who survive off of overtime. And so some of the work that I talk about in my financial education and just even bringing things out is that as we're working on our status and as we're applying for homes and you're doing things, always use your base pay. Qualify on your base pay. Don't qualify on your overtime pay. Because at some point when that pay doesn't match up or we're not getting the overtime, which we're seeing now in the year where we're past COVID, we're coming off of, restricted budgets, and we're really trying to hunker down and be more financially, responsible, because we're having to cut costs at every shape and every turn. But that means to the officer who is already paid below scale, who survives off of overtime, that's a challenge. So we're putting out surveys around what their needs are around financial literacy. We're using the fact that it's Financial Literacy Month, but it's also a training cycle for us. So I want to kind of push out all that info, because then the programming that we offer for the rest of the year is based on sort of the feedback that we get from the officers during these survey timeframes. So it does not mean that we can only survey during training cycles. I'm looking at having, other things like survey mode where they're anonymized and we can get feedback on different shorter topics. All of that is in works, but that's part of like an overall quality assurance system that I'm trying to put in place within the department.
Awesome. So Donna Jackson's, actually it was in reference to the civilian complaint process. She said it's paper-based, question mark, as this evolves to use technology and other efficiencies, maybe we can go digital. So that is one of our recommendations, that the civilian complaint process is digital, so that you don't have to go in, into the office and or into, anywhere and fill out paper, that we can do it online and from the comfort of your home. So that's one of our recommendations as well. Thank you for the explanation on those two processes, DC Lafayette.
Okay. So that completes that. So you want to take over from community engagement recommendations, Danielle?
Yes. So let me go in here. All right, so community engagement recommendations. Number 39 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department continue to enhance the new MV Well program, which is a community wellness model, which works with public and private partners, including but not limited to Westchester County's Department of Community Mental Health and the Department of Social Services to develop the overall health of and wellness of Mount Vernon residents by increasing social capacity, strengthening relationships, and encouraging self-sufficiency. Recommendation 40 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department consider changing their name from Community Policing Unit to Community Affairs Unit. And we feel like Community Affairs Unit is more welcoming, and it's a group that people will be more willing to interact with. Recommendation 41 is that the Mount Vernon Police Department develop a formal community engagement program and or policy that encourages members of service to participate in events, including but not limited to peace marches, local sporting events, neighborhood barbecues, or outdoor community movie nights, know your rights events, or homeless outreach. Also, we want the members of service to walk the community block by block. We want officers to introduce themselves to community members and carry a form of identification, whether it be as examples, a baseball card or a business card. We also, want them to take lead when possible if there's ever a joint task force that involves the community, police department, state agencies, or federal agencies. And we also want them to engage with the youth in the community. Stop to see if there's any questions, comments, suggestions. All right. I'll move on to the last two recommendations around equipment. And recommendation 42 is that all civilian and sworn members of service have a working body camera and a camera during all shifts, car camera during all shifts. And we recommend that the police department seek additional funding to acquire cameras for all the members of service, adequate storage, and also to get funding for the maintenance of the equipment. We think all three is vital to making sure that the cameras are utilized effectively for the community. And our last recommendation is that offensive military grade equipment not be used or purchased by the Mount Vernon Police Department. So that sums up our recommendations. And I would love to have folks chime in if there are any thoughts.
One thing about number 42 is that everybody's on the same page when it comes to that. The police officers want their body cameras, citizens want their body cameras, because it's one way for certain to see exactly what happened at an instance. They do actually have body cameras now. Part of the problem is that they don't have the storage for the data they need for it to continually use it. And unfortunately, I notice sometimes people, probably get a little tired of hearing it, but that is a controller issue in terms of paying for vendors and things along that line. Why that is not available completely to the police department. So, but that is one issue: body cameras and car cameras that everybody agrees on.
So I think, it's important. We're doing another one of these community conversations tomorrow to address, all 43 recommendations. There were some great suggestions made by the group today. And that's really our goal, to make sure that this is reflective of the community. So I encourage you all, if you know folks who are interested and want to be a part of this process, to go ahead and share the information for tomorrow. It should be on the city website. CMVNY on Facebook as well. And also, if there are any comments or suggestions that you weren't able to make today or didn't feel comfortable making, feel free to email communications@cmvny.com. The public comment period goes through March 21st. So we're looking to incorporate some suggestions. So we got some great suggestions today. So I wanted to thank you all for joining. Coach D or DC Lacker, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say that for our residents to understand it, listen, it's not a perfect document. I'm sure there's things that we could have put in and what have you. But the idea, like the old saying goes, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And this is a good working document. The commission members really did a great job of putting things together and producing this. And like the mayor the other night, iron sharpens iron. It did this process in many different cases. And sort of like to the point that the city councilman said at Sundays with Sean, a lot of kudos have to go to the women of the commission. They really helped bring this to across the finish line. You know about Danielle's job, how well she brought a consensus. You know about DC Lackard's job and how she pushed us in many different ways. But there's other people that did a great job. I know some of our most productive meetings was when Joanne Dunn and Tamika Coverdale came in and really came alive. And but the women really did a great job, and kudos to them for helping bring this over the finish line.
Thank you, Coach B. DC Lackard, you have some thoughts? All right, she might be working,
Yes, I just want to say, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. I just want to say thank you to everyone who spent their time today. I know, we thought, how could we get this down to an hour? And it's just impossible to really kind of flesh out the 43 recommendations and give it the attention that it needs, that all of us have worked so hard for the last couple of months to put together a robust document that we think feels, or at least speaks to the needs of the city. And again, I've said this before, so long as I'm working in the department and the relationships that we've established from the invested members of this commission, reform just actually begins after April 1, right? It's time for us to start getting to the job of implementing these great recommendations. And what that looks like and how that plays out is what collaboration needs the road, right? We need to figure out how we can partner with you to see this change show up in a meaningful way in the residents of the city of Mount Vernon. And there's only one way to do that, and that's through partnership. So I'm looking forward to the days that come. And, for those that feel that it doesn't meet their expectations, then challenge us as a department to do that. We're giving opportunities to various councils that we're doing. We're starting a police reform advisory council that will start April 1st. It will meet the second and fourth Wednesday of the month from 3 to 4:30. That's by Zoom at the moment. And so we're trying to find ways to say, let's keep the conversation going. Look at what we're doing and then give us feedback on what you think we should be lifting up to the eye of the residents that, maybe we don't think it's important, but the community thinks it should be lifted up. So, challenge us to do that. And, I don't think it'll be a hard lift, but we need you at the table to do that. So I just want to thank everyone for joining, not only just on the Zoom call, but who will continue to see this via the, Facebook Live and the multiple views that happens, beyond as soon as we finish this. But again, thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to the partnership. Thanks, Danielle, for co-chairing.
No worries. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing, and I think we can go ahead and end this video. So tomorrow we'll be back at it at 6 p.m. And you can find the information on the city's website and Facebook page. Awesome. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care.